Hi, my name's Eric. I'm one of the guys who's just completed Train the Trainer, and I've found the 6 sessions incredibly helpful. The content has allowed me to think about asking helpful questions, to develop a culture in my groups where people are learning and being vulnerable, and to train planters to plan, implement and sustain gospel growth.
The past 12 weeks or so have been incredible. The material we went through has been brilliant. The online sessions have been great. I, up to this point, have existed in largely the kind of teacher-preacher mode, where when I'm trying to communicate or teach something, it's usually delivered with me just speaking at a group of people, and them listening and hopefully absorbing some of what I've had to say. This
material has really challenged me, and I just made an announcement just 2 weeks ago at the church service that we're going to revamp the church's training program. And we're going to move into much more of discussions and application, and just where they are really discussing these things and putting into practice these principles that we've been learning here.
It's encouraging to understand that it's not our job as trainers to simply lecture and teach the material, but to create a learning environment in which all of the participants engage and work collectively in order to achieve new information that can be immediately applied in the ministry context.
I remember one of the phrases that stuck, it's still stuck in my mind. It is that, and it is pure gospel, is that the transformation, the church planter transformation, is not depend on us. It's depend on Christ's work.
We always have started our sessions with applying the gospel to our hearts. We can only teach people as deep as we go ourselves. So as we have been together in this great fellowship with wonderful men, and it's been encouraging for me to be with you, and also as I've seen you apply the gospel to your hearts, and it has taught me how to apply the gospel to my heart as well.
You know, I came thinking I'm actually a pretty good trainer, and then I go, actually, I think I was a pretty decent teacher, but I knew nothing about training. And after coming through this, I see such a big contrast between just teaching and training, that there are two different goals. Teaching is part of training, but you can teach and yet not train. And so after going through this with you guys, I really feel at least like the concepts are so much more clear.
It's also provided me with a cohort of like-minded pastors who want to start gospel movements in their cities. And as we share our experiences and the skills that we're developing, it's really encouraging me to continue to spur on to see more people come to know Jesus in my city.
The vision of City Europe is to create movements of the gospel in the cities of Europe. The vision basically describes why we exist. Why do we exist? Well, we do exist because we feel called to the cities of Europe to create movements of the gospel there through church planting. The 21st century is a time when more and more people live in cities, and we see that at the same time, church feels less and less able to do church or to apply the gospel into a young, urban, post-Christian, post-modern, post-secular society. And we do feel called to go to those places and to plant new churches. This is what City was all about from the beginning. Why we exist, why we started what we started. Because some leaders felt called to go to urban places in Europe to create movements of the gospel. Through church planting, this is our very specific contribution. We think a movement of the gospel is more than church planting in the city, but we feel called to contribute the planting of healthy new churches, then in collaboration with the existing churches to seek a movement of the gospel in the city. Our dream, basically, so what we dream and pray about is that we want to see revival. Revival in every city in Europe, in every country. We do believe if we started in the cities, then it will spread out through the whole country, through the whole Europe. And this is what we do. We do train and mentor and equip and coach people who become church planters, who then create churches in order to seek a movement of the gospel in the city and to change the whole city with the gospel. So we exist basically to create those movements of the gospel. And if one day in the future, every city in Europe has a self-running, owned by local people, movement of the gospel through church planting within it, then City to City doesn't need to exist anymore. But until that day, it needs a network or a movement like City to City to help those people to create those movements of the gospel. This is the vision of City to City Europe. Well, City to City Europe is all about helping people who have a shared vision or want to achieve something that they need help with. So it is, if you want to plant a church, either you are a church planter or someone who wants to be part of a church planting project, or if you and your church have the vision to plant a church, to send someone out to plant a church in a city, maybe in your city or another city, then City to City Europe can help you. We are able to help you to first connect you to other leaders in your city or region to get some support there in relationship, in asking questions, in a learning community and something like that. We can help you through the way we train you, how we connect you with a gospel coach, how we can. There's a lot of material, a lot of things that we can help you with specific question, but mainly it is a lot about the relationships. So we can help you to connect you with other people all over Europe or in your city or in your region that help you to plant that church. We believe if you want to plant a church in a city in Europe, then you shouldn't do that alone. You shouldn't do that alone on your own. You need a team, and your team and you need some people around you that support you. So in the best case, you need someone who becomes your mentor, and you're kind of an apprentice or a trainee. You need a trainer, or someone who, or in the best case, actually, there's a learning community that gets trained by someone who's an equipped trainer, and you need a gospel coach. So these are the three relationships that are at least the ones that we would suggest. Sometimes they're not there, but that would be the best case scenario. Saying all of that, we want to support people who want to plant churches or who want to send out church planters, and all the way from identifying, assessing, training, coaching, mentoring, sending out, supporting, multiplying a church. All of that. We want to be a supportive network and movement around that path. And we're quite experienced, and I think we have high quality material and good trained people who can help you on the way. And if you think that is something we can help you with, just connect through our website, connect through our social media, or connect locally with the leaders who are part of City to City Europe. And we are very eager to help everyone possible who is about creating movements of the gospel in the cities of Europe through planting churches.
Hello and welcome, everybody. We are starting our first virtual conversation of the evangelism project from Cities to Europe today. Welcome to our living room, so to say. So I don't know where you are watching this or listening to this. We're all in our living rooms or homes, and we try to have, in this time where we can actually not meet physically, a virtual conversation as if we were together in a room and talk about a good topic. I'm very happy to welcome my three guests today, Yevgeny and Giotis and Tim. Thank you for joining. And we will have a conversation today about, I think, a great topic, which is why should anybody in Europe be motivated to share the gospel with anyone else? This is such a big thing, and we will only have 45 minutes to talk, but I think we have three interesting guests that will actually have a lot to say, and it's hopefully inspiring and motivating for you if you listen and watch this. This whole thing is starting today. So we're starting a series of blog posts and virtual conversations at from City to City Europe's evangelism project. If you want to know more about this, find out at our website about on the evangelism project. And this is only the first of a whole series of these kind of conversations. So make sure that you have maybe more on your list for the future to come. The whole vision of Cities to Europe is that we want to see movements of the gospel in the cities of Europe. And that has a lot to do with church planting, leadership development, training, coaching, and all these kind of things. But today we're kind of digging deep into the very core of what we actually want to see. The whole thing, the whole church planting effort that we have in training and coaching, all these things, basically serves one goal, that as many Europeans as possible, people who believe in the gospel and love to share it, actually are motivated and equipped to share that gospel. That's why we plant churches. That's why we train people. That's why we do everything what we do. It is basically that as many people in the cities of Europe will hear the gospel in a way that's actually inviting to them. And that is our conversation today, why it should be motivated. Let me introduce our guests to you. First of all, there is Giotis, and he is from Athens. He is a pastor in a Protestant church in Athens. He is leading a city network and church planting, and he is our regional catalyst from City to City Europe for the whole regions of Balkans. Then Yevgeny Bakhmutsky. He is a planter and pastor of a very missional church in Moscow. He's leading church planting initiative in Moscow and other cities in Russia and Eastern Europe. And he is also an author and speaker about the topics around the gospel. And then Tim Keller, he is the planter and was the pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan, New York. He is the founder of City to City Europe, author of several books, and he is a leader with, I think, how I experienced you, with a lot of interest in things that are going on in Europe. So welcome everybody here, and I will give you the opportunity to begin speaking to each other. I think not every one of you have actually met the three of you together in a room like that. It would be great to do that one day. But have you guys actually been to each other's cities? So have you been to the city of everyone here? Yevgeny.
Yeah, I've been in New York a number of times, and a special time when I went to see Redeemer, and I had a short conversation with Tim. And yeah, New York, it's a Moscow. It's the same. So Moscow spirit.
Have you been to Athens? Have you yet been to Athens, to Giotis? Also. Right?
Never met him,
yeah.
But I met the spirit of Apostle Paul there.
Okay. How about you, Giotis?
It's almost the same. It's almost the same. I have been to New York, never to Moscow, several times in New York. And I also had the privilege of, in the very, very early days of our going out to start planting, to visit Redeemer, but you were not there that particular Sunday, Brother Tim.
Tim, have you been to these places?
I have not yet, and I'm hoping God gives me the length of life to be able to do so. But I have not been to Moscow or Athens. It is true, though, that when I do go to the Moscows, the Londons, the Hong Kongs, the places like that, the big great cities of the world are awfully similar in some ways. They're always unique, and yet at the same time there is some common spirit or sensibility that you have in those great cities. So, but I would love to be there. Not yet.
Well, then I'm the only one who has actually been to all these cities. Well, I take that as a privilege.
That makes you the moderator.
Well, okay, let us go into our topic. So the topic basically is, why should anyone in Europe be motivated to share the gospel? And let me begin with you, Tim. You're not from Europe, but you have had the opportunity to plant a church and to have a lot of gospel conversation with people. In your talks, you sometimes refer that you had hundreds of conversations with people who were New Yorkers, who were skeptics, who were unchurched people. And what motivated you personally to do that? So if we're talking today about the motivation why Europeans should do that, why did you, in your context, do that very much? Why did you focus on that?
Well, even though, thank you. By the way, I have done 4 evangelistic weeks in the United Kingdom, which is, and an awful lot of the people that I was doing evangelism with were not only British, but also a good number of other Europeans there. And the difference, New York City is not that different. As we just mentioned, especially in the big cities or in the university towns, the kinds of questions are similar. What motivates you at first is duty. I as a young Christian, a new Christian, I read a lot of John Stott books. Mm-hmm. And John Stott was very strong on the duty of every Christian to share their faith. I remember having these little tiny booklets that, at least in America, they were little tracts like the John Stott. He would, like evangelism, why and how, and they were very convicting to me. Before I came to New York, however, I think that even though I was a minister, I did it mostly out of a sense of duty. In some ways, when I got to New York City, which is more like Europe, I actually enjoyed evangelism more, and I think I was more able to do it because Christianity was a little more strange to people. One of the problems is when it's, and I think you may find it in places like Athens and Moscow, where the areas where it's either Catholic or Orthodox, very often people think they know what Christianity is all about. And so they don't even give you a hearing. And in the South, where I was in New York, in Virginia, and places like the middle part of America, everybody thinks they understand Christianity, so they don't give you a hearing. I found that even though there was more hostility, there was also more ignorance. And if you present Christianity in a way they didn't expect, it was easier to do. It was easier, humanly speaking, easier to surprise people with some of the unique offers of the gospel. So I actually didn't do a whole lot of evangelism until I moved to New York City, and I was almost 40 years old. But so there's still hope for you all out there. Okay.
Cool. Well, okay, Yevgeny, how about you? What's your personal motivation? What we hear, at least what the outside assumption is, maybe that in Russia, sometimes talking about your faith, about the gospel even, is not that easy. So what motivates you to do it yourself or to motivate others?
Yeah, Stephan, it's very true that many people thinking that faith, it's a very personal thing, that I don't want anyone to see that. And only sectarians, evangelicals, they could speak openly about. But I think the biggest reason why, I think there are 2 things, probably the most. First one, glory of God. When you see his beauty, you can't keep silence. Mm-hmm. Just want to share, because we're all natural evangelists. We all speak what we love. So the more I see Christ, beauty and his glory, the more I want to share with him from my heart. And second, compassion to my people. I look around, I see that my city needs redeeming work of my Savior. I just want to see my city to be redeemed through his grace. So I just want to share. I think it's the biggest motivation in my life, in spite of all these obstacles.
Yeah, well, that's good. Hopeful. Thank you. Giotis, you're a pastor of an existing, very established church in the middle of Athens, right beneath the Pantheon, great view. So you have a lot of people that are gospel believers in your church. What do you think hinders them to share the gospel, or maybe what is something that motivates you?
Yeah, I feel the temptation to say, what it was said, it is totally right. And we all know that is our duty, that we love God and we feel compassion, but still our reality is that we don't evangelize. So I think having said all of that, then we come again to the question, why then we don't? And I can only speak about or I can speak of about others, but let me focus on our own experience. We are a small community of evangelical believers, 0.3 in a country which is culturally Christian. I will use this term. Some people use nominal. The majority of the people, they see us as a foreign cult, as something which is suspicious. And so the question, why we don't evangelize, why we are not open with our faith, I would say, first of all, it's fear, or it's this sense that, we are a minority, and after a while we start thinking as a minority and acting as a minority and developing this fortress mentality that, let's be protected, within these four walls of the fortress and avoid this hostile territory, which is the world. So that is a very important reason, fear. The other reason, and we have brother Tim, who right now represents United States for us, it's cynicism, and I'll explain. Most of the narratives that come from United States, particularly when we think about evangelism and church planting, because this is for most of us, the books that we read, the reports that we receive, I mean, we don't know much about China or other parts of the world. They suffer from what I call the Stephen Jobs syndrome. By that I mean that most people in the United States, they love narrating how they started small and now they have this huge multi-billion, and they think, they do that in very good intentions. They want to encourage us saying these stories. So for example, if you, brother Tim, come to us and you say, let me tell you about Redeemer, we started small and now we are like in 3-4 locations we have planned. This is amazing. But I mean, there is this interesting dynamic in our own experience that we say, okay, this is too extreme, it's not going to happen to us, so why bother? I mean, a question that I always have to face is, okay, what do you aspire for? I mean, you're 0.3, what do you think? Okay, you planted 3, 4, 5 churches. I mean, even if you plant 100 churches, the best it can happen is from 0.3 go to 0.4. So what's the difference? So I think these are some dynamics that we need to address, when we think about motivation.
Yeah, that's true.
Anymore.
Yeah.
Well, let's
actually, I think there's a great motivation for such situation, because we are the same. Even
I know. Stephan
recently,
chose the two of us. We come from, in a way, that part of Europe that is quite different than Northern Europe and other parts of Europe.
And we can motivate each other that we may be laying down one more brick for spiritual awakening of our nations. Maybe we're not going to see that, but we're going to have one more brick, 0.4, 0.5. And maybe one day another generation will see spiritual awakening.
Yes.
Yeah, let's maybe focus, from the personal motivation of you to, the broad picture in Europe. So why should anybody in Europe share the gospel? Some people consider Europe kind of as hard ground for the gospel these days. In the past it was different. Maybe today in other parts of the world it's different. So why would anyone want to do this, anymore? And maybe, Tim, your percentages in New York when you came there were not that different, maybe, to some places in Europe.
Right.
And so, what would you say to people in Europe who think that way? We're kind of behind, or we're kind of, this is a weird spot for the church right now. What would motivate people, or what did motivate you back then to do that?
Well, say to me, to go from 0.3 to 0.4% is a lot. Is a lot.
I know.
I mean, that's 25.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think you say, what difference does it make? It's very much like Jesus says, the king gave one group 10 talents, 5 talents, remember? And the 5-talent person got another 5. The 10-talent person got another 10. And the king was equally happy with the 2 servants. He didn't say to the 5-talent person, why didn't you get 10? Well, he only had 5. And so if you're in Moscow or Athens and you have 0.3 and you go to 0.4, I think, first of all, that's more than I could produce. I mean, so think about it like that. And that's motivation. You want to please the Lord. I mean, you want to please the Lord that saved you. What you're referring to, Stephan, and this might help, is when we've done some study in the center of New York City in 1989, we assumed that about 9,000 people were going to what we would call evangelical churches in the center city part of New York. That's 9,000 out of 1,050,000 people. 9,000. So it does sound pretty European, doesn't it? And we have slowly inched our way up to that's less than 1%, but we slowly inched our way up to over 5%. But that's over 30 or 40, 30 years. And if you go to the rest of our America, if you go to a place like Houston or Atlanta and you ask what percentage of people go to evangelical churches, it's like a third to a half, because it's a very religious part of the country. So I do think one of the motivations is how many talents do you start with? And the Lord just wants you to multiply the talents you start with. And secondly, it can happen for various reasons. I believe that God will bless you if you're willing to have perfect love casts out fear. And if we had perfect love, we'd be perfect evangelists. But to the degree that we let God's love fill our hearts, that gets rid of the fear, and we start talking to people, and there will be progress.
Can I say something here? I mean, what I said is what makes other people feel intimidated.
Yes, I understood that. I heard you.
And I totally agree that, first of all, in my office, I have a big sign that says we invite the unexpected to happen. I mean, this is Christian history. Is when there is no hope, God does the unexpected, but you need to be there to invite the unexpected. It's a little oxymoron, but it's what it is. So, and the other interesting thing is also that going from 0.3 to 0.4, like say you have 100 more churches in Athens, that changes the environment and the climate. So you have, the big church in our context is the Greek Orthodox Church, which is very nominal in many ways. However, I imagine if there are more vibrant evangelical churches, that definitely will bring some change to this dominant culture towards leaning more to the. So there are many good reasons why we shouldn't despair, and instead we should move forward. And and eventually, of course, Luke 15 is the one sheep, which is something in a funny way that not only us but Europe can teach the rest of the world, that eventually the motivation of evangelism is not numbers. And I think we all agree with that. It's not the outcome. It's what Yevgeny described, and what, it's faithfulness, and it's it's worship. So sometimes people miss that when they think about evangelism. But we do, it's very clear for us, because that's many times, that's the only reason why we do it, because we see no fruit. We cannot tell any numbers.
Well, Evgeny, you sent me a picture a couple of months ago of a church planter conference in, I think, St. Petersburg or somewhere in Russia. So it seems like there are a lot of people who want to start new churches, and that is, of course, in order to have people who share the gospel with people in the city. So why are so many people motivated to share the gospel and to even plant more churches in order to do that?
Yeah, there are many reasons. Some of them great, some of them maybe not so great. But a pleasure for me to talk about them. I think the first thing is Eastern Europeans, many Eastern Europeans, they're still searching for their own identity. Some of them found it already in their religious or even ethical roots, but it would not take much time for them to experience dissatisfaction. Such rediscovered, reconstructed, rebuilt identity, because only the gospel can bring peace and joy and satisfaction in their hearts. So I see many opened, skeptic, and searching hearts today in former Soviet Union. It's just happening. So there's a big mass of people really waiting for. Also, predominant religious and social institutions continue to lose their influence and power. And it's also another way to see how gospel truly unites people better than any hierarchical and any other way of structure on institutions. Thirdly, there are many people who realize that communism and even democracy are not the answers they're not really looking for. There should be something bigger, stronger, deeper, beyond us. And again, the gospel is the only best and a very truthful, compelling answer. And also, when people see gospel-centered community, it's such a huge difference with religious formal institutions that they want to come and see. They want to come and see this multi-ethnical group of people loving each other and having something unique that you can't experience anywhere, that many people from kind of established churches, they want to see such churches, so they try to revitalize, replant, or even plant new ones. I think this is the biggest reasons why I see.
Wow, that's beautiful. Very helpful. Well, we only have a few minutes left for our first part of the conversation, and I do want to remind. Yeah, I know. I do want to remind everybody who's watching us that you can put a question in the chat or Facebook or YouTube chat, so you can ask a question, and those questions will be given to us in a couple of minutes to interact with them. So there's even a broader conversation. So we don't have to finish in a few minutes, Yevgeny. We have a few more time, but we will include some questions from the outside. So please, if you have a question. In the meanwhile, Tim, let me ask a question to you as an outsider from Europe, but you're kind of watching. We had a conversation, I remember, during the conference of City Europe in Krakow about the reality that Europe is kind of in a unique phase. So it was different long time, quite few generations ago. It seems like that a few generations ago, people were very eager and open to talk about religious things, share the gospel. And it seems like today, even in the world, in other places, it seems to, be more easy, or it needs to maybe even bear somehow more fruit.
Right.
But it seems like we in Europe, we're kind of in the blind spot or something like that in terms of, sharing the gospel with our friends or our people. So, but you said something very hopeful that I think would be very helpful to hear again.
Okay. Yes, I do think European evangelical Christians have something of an inferiority complex. Like, we're not very big, and they hear about things going on in China and Africa and Latin America, and we're behind. But in many ways, what I was saying to you that day was, no, you're actually pioneers in this way, and you're at the head of the curve. But because the challenge that's coming to the whole world is the challenge of secularism, which is very, very strong it's most strong actually in northern and Western Europe, but it's also there in Eastern and Southern Europe, and it's in North America, but it's also spreading to the biggest cities everywhere. Mm-hmm. And some years ago, I read a book by D.T. Niles, who was an Indian Christian, who talked about the stone of stumbling, that he thought that every faith had something that they didn't like about the gospel. So he said Hinduism stumbles over the incarnation, and Islam stumbles over the cross, and Buddhism stumbles over the resurrection. But secularism, all those faiths still believe you need to be saved. Mm-hmm. See, in other words, anyone else we've ever talked to, Christians have dealt with Hinduism and Islam, and we've dealt with the old European paganism. What did Christianity replace in Europe? Well, it replaced Odin and all the pagan gods. But we've never faced what secularism gives you, which is a disbelief that we need salvation at all. Mm-hmm. In other words, the stone of stumbling is the idea of sin and the need for salvation. So that if you're trying to save a Hindu, at least the Hindu says, no, you're wrong, and he might be very angry. On the other hand, the Hindu knows he needs salvation. Mm-hmm. And this is the first culture in which we're trying to speak the gospel into a culture that actually doesn't believe in any transcendence, doesn't believe in anything outside of this world, doesn't believe really in sin or the need for salvation. And in some ways, even your effort to evangelize them is the very thing they think they need to be saved from. They need to be saved from people who think they need to be saved.
Yeah.
So true. And that is a really tough barrier that I don't think the Christian church has faced. It's not exactly anything even the early church faced. Mm-hmm. I find that European Christians are maybe it's just because they are more aware of history than a lot of other Christians around the world. They tend to be pretty analytical. They tend to enjoy theology. And I think it's going to take a lot of historical and theological thinking and a lot of sociological thinking. It's going to take a lot of inventiveness to say, how do we share the gospel with secular people? And because you are in the most secular part of the world, you're the laboratory. And therefore, instead of just saying, oh, it's hard to do, but you must teach the rest of us, because to some degree or another, the biggest cities of every part of the world are becoming more secular. You can ask, go to the middle of Mumbai or Delhi, and those young urban professionals who are, running the country, they'll be Hindu in name, but you press underneath there, and they're a lot more European. They're a lot more secular, a lot more individualistic than their parents or their grandparents. So what you are facing is in a very strong way. The rest of us are facing in a weaker way, and we're all having trouble winning those kinds of people. We can win traditional people and people even in other religions, but when it comes to those very hard and secular people, it's tough. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but actually, in some ways, you're the pioneers. Now, is that what you remember I said, brother? Yeah. So to say is that the Lord has put you in a position where you could actually exert leadership. I mean, those of us who are frankly white and Western have to be very, very careful not to think that we're still the leaders of the whole world Christian church. We're not. But we have a lot. We can serve the whole church, and this is one of the ways in which we can serve the world church. Mm-hmm. So sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but
that's very good. I remember having that conversation. It was really encouraging to me. I thought that is actually an encouraging approach. I don't know, Yevgeny, Giotis, is that encouraging as a Christian to share the gospel, or leading other Christians to do that? Is that hopeful?
It's very interesting that we here in Russia, we kind of in a middle way. From one side, we boring experiencing what people in the West already experienced, so we can learn from them. That's why I love to read Tim's books and some others. But at the same time, we just speedily running, I mean, so quickly running to the stage what Tim explained right now. I see more and more people in Moscow. First, there are almost 1 million Jews. Majority of them just not this atheistic, they just secular. And you can't evangelize them with knowing Hebrew or Jewish history. You got to talk from different point of view, just from different worlds. It's like from other realm. And it's so, we are in Moscow, for one side, we're talking with kind of nominal Russian Orthodox, with nominal Muslims, and also, but all of them mostly secular. It's such a really unique situation. So we need to learn. We can give something from us, but we need to learn much from others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm trying to relate what Brother Tim just said to our context. Again, we live in a country, and not only Greece, but many Eastern Orthodox countries still, they tend to be very traditional. Of course, it's a mixed bag. And here are some of my thoughts. First of all, secularism still is under development. So in a way, we cannot really predict what kind of form secularism will take. And I mean, like in the United States, all of a sudden you realize you had a president, it seemed that things went, in a different direction, and who knows how the society develops. So I think that is an open-ended thing. Second is that in our context, in a weird way, we are really far ahead because we are a church that tries to evangelize in a context where the power structures are not helping us. So it's not a church protected, which is like a feature that you find in a lot of European churches, especially Northern European. So in a way, the state is even against us, definitely not protecting us. And also, we don't assume that we speak the same language with an Orthodox. When I say, you need to receive Jesus Christ, I mean by faith, through prayer, whatever. They mean taking the Eucharist on Sunday. So in order to evangelize, I need to check my discourse and try that I make myself understood. So I think there are many different dynamics that are in play when we are having this discussion. And finally, it's secularism in our context. It's a good thing. So I know that in most Western places, it's the challenge that somehow we need to face. For us, believe it or not, in a weird way, I mean, we welcome it. Why? Because in a way, what is the main thesis? That you break ties with your traditions, and which is something which is really welcome for us. I mean, because people being tied to their tradition, it's a big wall whenever we try to witness. I mean, people think that they're already Christians because so that presents us, and in many places in the world it presents us, and I should argue even in the West it presents us with new ways, new opportunities to do evangelism. Like even in the Netherlands, even in Germany, even in the United States, it gives you new opportunities to do more authentic evangelism, not cultural evangelism.
That's true, yeah.
Right, because if you are, I remember that my parents moved to Johnstown, Pennsylvania many years ago. Johnstown, Pennsylvania was a heavily Polish, Hungarian, Catholic steel town, blue collar, and they and the grandparents and the parents, if you tried to evangelize them, they would say, "I'm sorry, I could never go to a Protestant church because I'm Polish." So in other words, their faith was part of their personal identity. Yeah. But when you got to the grandchildren, which were basically people in their teens or 20s, they had become more secular. And what that meant was that they felt more free to try other things out. And when we started a Presbyterian church in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, it was back 1980 something. When we organized the church, the average age, we had 100 people, and the average age of the converts was about 22. We were trying to get elders, and of course, our elders were all in there like 25, 26, 27, because the only people in the whole city, since it was like 90% Catholic, but the only people that were secular enough to be converted, that's what you're talking about here, were actually the younger people. And so in that sense, secular is good. There's another side in which it's bad. So I'm glad you pointed that out, brother.
That's right.
Because that shows that there's always what I'm trying to say is there's always an advantage as well as a disadvantage for the gospel in every cultural new wrinkle. And it's our job to try to minimize the disadvantage and try to capitalize on the advantage.
Oh, very good. So guys, I kind of have to interrupt a little bit, but we will still have a few questions to talk about. But let me bring in from the outside a question that was given in the chat, and you can still put your question to the chat on Facebook or YouTube if you want to. So here's a question. Maybe we should start with Giotis, because you're probably the most one to interact with that. Here someone says, how is the big number of immigrants impacting the church or the reality in Europe today? How does that impact the approach to share the gospel, to evangelize people in places like Athens, Moscow, Frankfurt?
The short answer is tremendously. The more sophisticated answer is that for those of us who were in a city-to-city conference in Paris, remember that Grace Davy was there, and she explained the dynamics of religiosity in Europe. And again, that has to do with this discussion about this open-ended secularism and all the predictions that is going to go this way or the other way. And I remind you that she's a famous sociologist of religion, let me say for those of you who don't know her. And she claimed that one of the interesting developments in terms of religion in Europe is the influx of immigrants and refugees that totally change in an unpredicted way the scene in Europe. And that is totally our reality. I mean, I would not dare to give numbers, but my hunch is that there are almost in Athens as many Greek-speaking churches as, I mean, it may not be quite, but it may be close, or even let's say half the number of immigrant churches. And that, of course, you know, because when we think in terms of the kingdom of God, which we are supposed to think, and unfortunately many times we don't, because we only count in a particular way, that it has tremendous effect for us. Yes. So that was the long answer.
Okay. Good. Here's another question, and Yevgeny or Tim, you can pick it up. How critical is it to understand the interests and needs and way of thinking of secularized people before approaching them with the gospel? So it is, of course, important, but maybe why is it important to at first understand that and then approach it?
Evgeny, you want to start?
Yeah, when you have such a wise person, especially according to Russian culture, you still need to offer all the experienced person to answer. So go ahead.
Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, generally you should try to find out where the stone of stumbling is. It's a wonderful term that D.T. Niles used. It said that generally speaking, there's overlap between what the Christian gospel, and there's always some overlap with the culture of the person you're trying to talk to. And so in many ways, for example, Islam, there's a lot of things a Muslim would agree with a Christian on. And it's also true for secularism. Tom Holland's new book, he's a British writer, wrote a book called Dominion, in which he shows how much of modern secular moral values like human rights and care for the poor are actually values that came from the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so what you want to do is you want to start with the overlap, and you actually want to start talking about the things you agree with. Then the way you reason with anybody is to say, do you believe this? Oh, well, I believe this too. And then we talk and we both agree. But if you believe that, why don't you believe this? So what you do is you try to get to the parts they don't agree with by starting with the parts they do. And so like, here's Christianity and here's the other culture, there's an overlap. And you start in the place where you both agree, and then you move into the place where you disagree, and then you argue on the basis of that. So that's the reason why it's not just true that you need to understand secularism, you have to understand the culture of anybody you're talking to.
Yeah, you know, Stephan, I found that the gospel could be accepted when it's understood. And in order to present it in an understandable way, you got to understand your audience, the way how they think, their categories. So when you understand them well, you can present well. It is not going to be kind of only right words, but words that could be understood. And it's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, then, probably the last question here is, one assumption of many people in Europe is that the gospel is an answer to one question in life. Is that part of the problem? And I'm assuming that the question kind of assumes that it actually should be the question for the answer to every question in life. Is Europe suffering the problem that where Christians are only answering one question when they think about evangelism?
You can't always make me go first, brothers.
Giotis or Yevgeny.
Yeah.
Well, we're wasting precious time, so I'm gonna jump in. And let me challenge the question, if I may, by saying that yes, it is very important, and at the same time, it is very Western, and at the same time, it is very Protestant to think, when we think about the gospel, to think about questions and about answers and about convictions and about changing the way that people think, and that is totally right. But at the same time, we also need to keep in mind that many traditions, and definitely Eastern, and by that term, I don't mean Oriental, but I mean like Eastern Orthodox, and a lot of postmodern thinking. It's more not so much cerebral, but it's more affectionate. It has to do with the heart, with what you love, what you admire, and not what makes sense necessarily. And I think that is a whole other area that we also need to address when we think about evangelism in Europe particularly, but generally around the globe. So that would be my response to that.
Very wise.
Good. Okay, so we're almost at the end of our time. I want to ask a final question to the three of you, and really just a 2 or 3 sentence answer. So let's take the visionary approach. So let's say that maybe in a few years, the big majority of European gospel believers are very motivated and equipped to share the gospel with everyone that they possibly could think of. So what could happen? What would be a visionary motivation to do this? What if everyone in Europe would just start to share the gospel on a regular basis with people around them and do basically what the early church did and lived it out in word and deed? What could happen in Europe?
I think, first of all, it will help Tim Keller to write another book about gospel advancement, because he will get a great data to analyze. But a spiritual awakening of a single soul or city always connected to individual gospel conversations. And it's all started from one person or a group of people just doing what disciples of Christ, apostles, been doing. Sometimes we're thinking that we got to have something uniquely know-how special thing, but we already have the gospel and we have God himself on our side. And if every believer will start, Holy Spirit will move him or her in a right direction. And also because of, we're not talking about evangelism as only like a personal, private project, but also community of faith effort. And they will share, they will discuss, they will do analysis. And we do hope that Europe will experience a second awakening. And
that's a big dream right there. Very good. Giotis, what do you think? What could happen?
I think that I would give my time to Brother Tim to respond, because we are, over our time, and I have spoken already enough, I think.
When I was in seminary, I read a book by Michael Green, who just died, I think, last year. Who was he was the rector at St. Aldous Church in Oxford for many years, and a great scholar called Evangelism in the Early Church. And he made the case, very scholarly book, that in the early church, evangelism did not happen through people bringing their friend to hear the great speaker, that 85% or more of evangelism was through just gospel conversations, ordinary people to their friends. He made all the reasons why it actually wasn't safe to bring people, non-Christians into church services and things. I remember saying, "Oh, that's interesting." And now I'm near the end of my life saying, this is the only way forward in places like Europe and increasingly in North America, that the non-believers have to be incubated, as it were, in gospel conversations with friends. And at a certain point, they might be in a position where they can go hear the great speaker. But if Stephan, if frankly, even 10 to 15% of all European Christians started to get very intentional about, even 10 to 15% got very intentional about gospel conversations, you would have a renewal. Absolutely, you'd have another revival. So that's a challenge.
Well, then let's do that. Let's pray for that. And for everybody who is watching us, let's just do it. Let's take opportunities whenever we have to motivate each other, to have gospel conversations with everyone that we have. I think the gospel is the most beautiful thing and the greatest invention ever on this planet. And let's just share it. That's what City City is all about. City City Europe's vision is to create movements of the gospel in the cities of Europe. And it would exactly take what we were talking about today. It would take gospel communities to be intentional about sharing the gospel with everyone, to see movements of the gospel in the cities of Europe. And we're trying to be helpful in what we do. If this was interesting for you, we will have more of these kind of conversations in the future. You can log into our Instagram or Facebook or website. You will see that the Evangelism Project has another set of really interesting topics coming up. There will be some blog posts about it, and there will be more of these kind of conversations. The next one is going to be on January 6th, and it's going to be about the challenges of evangelism in Europe. Why is sharing the gospel in Europe so hard? That's the next conversation. You're all invited to join that. I want to thank you very much to Yevgeny and Giotis and Tim. Thank you for being our guests in my living room virtually today, to have this great opportunity to talk. And I want to thank everyone for watching and joining this. Thank you very much. Goodbye and have a great evening. And yeah, we can already say good holidays and Merry Christmas. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Blessings.
Mm-hmm.